Hello and welcome to this tutorial on the world settings in Crayta. We're going to look at how we can customize the sky and the fog and give our world some kind of drama and just look at some of the options that might be available to us as creators when we want to customize our world settings. To get to the world settings, you're going to need to use advanced mode. This is one of those rare occasions where I'm going to be dipping into advanced mode, but we're not doing any scripting. So don't worry if you don't like scripting. We can do all of this without any scripting at all. So hit tab to go into advanced mode. You need to be creating a game and then hit tab to go into advanced mode. On the right hand side, you'll see we have our world tree. And if I click on this tab that says world on it, that will open up our world settings. In here, the first couple of settings I just wanted to highlight are to do with photo mode. So the first one allows you to turn the ability to enter photo mode on or off. So if you don't want people taking photos of your world, you can turn that off. And the second setting is, do you want your players to be able to fly their camera around? And most of the time, I would recommend to have this turned on so that people can take photos of your awesome games and share them on social media and just help promote your game for you. However, if it's going to break some kind of game mechanic, let's say you want to keep something hidden and allowing players to drive their fly their drone around will break that mechanic, then turn that off or leave it off. It's off by default. And so that's the world settings to do with the photo mode. Let's explore these sky settings now, because this is where it gets really exciting with changing aspects of how our game world feels. So in the first instance, we have this editor rendering settings override. And if we edit our sky settings and make it all look really awesome, if that's getting in the way of us doing any building, then we can check this on and it will turn off all of those settings for us so that we can more easily see things like, the inside of these caves are a little bit easier to see. And we can see into the distance without that fog there. So if the world settings or the custom sky you've got is kind of getting in the way of you being productive, then make sure that you check that editor rendering settings override on so that you can just crack on with your building and then turn it off. And it will publish off, but it will stay on if you're testing the game in the editor. Right, so that's the override. The time of day, this is exactly what it sounds like. At the moment in my game, it's about 5:30 in the afternoon. So we're experiencing a lovely sort of golden hour sunset type situation. If I wanted to change this, I can change the numbers in these boxes either by typing and then hitting enter. So that's changed it to 5:30 midday. Or I can click and drag on them and move the time of day like that. And it's quite nice to be able to do that, especially when you're looking at getting an exactly right time of day. So maybe I want it just when the sun is sort of halfway above the horizon. It's quite nice to be able to do that as it's updating live. And if you drag past the hour, it doesn't matter. So yeah, there's a couple of ways of editing that there. The day length by default is set to 0, and this is to do with if you want your game to have a day cycle. So if you don't want it to have a day cycle and maintain exactly the same time no matter who's playing and what time and all that stuff, then leave it at 0. If you want to force players to experience a day cycle, then you can change the length of the day here. So let's say I want a day cycle to last 1 minute. If I put a 1 in the minute box there, we'll see that the sunset completes and we are now at nighttime. There's not much light in my game world at nighttime. The sun is moving underneath us there, almost like it's around the other side of the world. And because it's west over there where the sun's set, I am expecting the sun to rise in the east at some point. So gradually what's going on behind the scenes is the numbers are ticking up, and it's probably like, 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. And there's our beautiful sunrise. Here it comes. And because it's only 1 minute long, my day, it's going to be moving at a rapid pace. Or technically, is the Earth spinning at that rapid pace? I don't know. The sun is moving at a rapid pace across the sky. So yeah, so that's a 1 minute long day cycle, or you can set it the time to 0, as I said, and that should then stay at the time that you set it. So let's just put this time back to 1736. There we go. Okay, so that's the start time and the day length. Let me just, a handy thing to know is that if you edit some of these settings and you're going a little bit off piste and you're not sure what it was to start with, you can right click any of them. They'll be highlighted in this orange shadow that you see behind any that you've edited. And if you right click it and then select revert property, that will mean that it goes back to what it was by default. So that's worth bearing in mind when you're editing the world settings. And I think that applies to or anything that you see in the entity editor over here on the right hand side. The lighting has got shadows enabled by default, but now we're entering into our lighting model, and it's our global lighting model. So this is how everything, this is the lighting that will affect everything in your game world. And there's 3 main sources of light. There are the sun, the moon, and the skylight. So the sun is fairly self-explanatory. It's this big ball of flaming hot gas over here. And so the sunlight will be coming from there and shooting in the direction towards us here. So it's heading in this direction. And we can change which direction the sun is and which direction therefore the light is coming from by changing this sun direction slider here. So you can see that the sun is moving left to right, and we're essentially changing what's north, south, east and west. We're changing the direction of the sun. So I wanted the sunset over here because I thought it looked quite nice and it casts some nice shadows, but equally it could be quite cool to have the sun setting over the landscape in that direction. So yeah, I mean, that looks quite nice too. So you can kind of fiddle around with the sun direction and change, and that changes the shadow. So notice now, whereas this was a dark rock face before, it's now illuminated by the sun. So I'm going to turn that back to how I had it before. The sun color is self-explanatory. It's just the color of the light that's coming from the sun. If you wanted to, you could, especially at this sort of time of day, you could really warm things up a little bit. If it's that golden hour sunset kind of time. I'm sticking mine with like a cold white light. So it's generic light here. I'm just going to revert that, and that's what it is by default. Now the sun intensity is how strong the light coming from the sun is. So the higher this number, the stronger the intensity of the sunlight. And notice that there's still dark shadows, even with that number all the way up. That's going to be important when we move on to the skylight in the future. So just choose what sort of, how strong you want that sunlight to be. If your game you want it to be quite light, then have that number higher. I'm keeping mine as the sort of default light. I quite like the default for that. So the moon is obviously very different from the sun. And it's only visible at night. So the moonlight is light that only appears when we are looking at about 6 o'clock for our sunset. So anything after 6 o'clock, and now we're in sort of moonlight territory. And you've got the same sort of thing that you had for the sun, where you can change the color of the moon. If you wanted to change the direction of the moon, it actually relates exactly to the direction of the sun. So the moonlight at the moment will be coming from exact opposite of where the sun was setting. So it'll be coming from over there. And if I up my moon intensity, you can kind of see that in a little bit more detail. Actually, it looks like it's coming from, moonlight's coming from over there. Yeah, it's coming from over there. So the sun's set there and the moon is coming from over there. And you can also change the phase of the moon if you want to see it. So there we go. So we've got our moonlight, and this is only visible at night. I'm just going to revert this so that it's dark in my game at night, even though I'm not really using night. And let's go back to our sort of just before sunset moment here. The next the next part of lighting, or the next light that will be active in our scene as a global light, is this skylight. And so this, you may be wondering what the difference between sunlight and skylight is. Well, the sun is our directional light. It's coming from over here, and it hits, it hits things that block the light, and then that causes the shadow on the other side. The skylight is kind of that ambient light that exists everywhere in our game. So it's in existence in both the light areas and the dark areas. If your game has got, you feel like it's got a bit too dark shadows, and the shadows are a bit too punchy, then you might want to increase your skylight intensity. And there's two sliders, one for day and one for night. So if I increase my skylight intensity, I can see it's not affecting how bright the sun is, but it is just lightening up the shadows. And if I stick it all the way up, you can see that there's not really any shadow to be seen anymore. Ambient light kind of gets everywhere. So even in this little cubby, and even in here, there's no shadow where you might feel like there should be inside this cave on a sunny day when the sun is literally the other side of this cliff. So that's what ambient light is all about. It's about just lighting up those shadowy areas. And you can have day and night, and you can change the color of that as well, both day and night colors. So I've got my skylight, the default in the day, it's kind of this orangey hue, but if you changed it, it would set. So if I change it to green, you can kind of see everywhere that is that has some ambient light. There we go. So let's just return it to that nice warm hue. At night, you'll see by default it's like a bluey hue, which is appropriate for the moon. But you can change this stuff as much as you like, and maybe you're on a different planet, or maybe in your game world you're really accentuating a certain mood. Maybe it's cooler, maybe it's warmer. Finally, so that's the different lighting, and lighting is so important in your game. So it's worth just having a look at this and seeing what kind of lighting might best suit the mood of your game. Writers and film directors and game designers use weather and light all the time to accentuate certain feelings and moods. This game is going to be like an RPG type, explorer type game, maybe with a bit of combat, but I wanted it to feel almost a little bit on the spooky side. So I've got like, the lighting in my game is really shadowy, but there's no bright sunshine, there's no beautiful sunset. It's more like a bit of a gloomy day on the beach. Let's look at our atmosphere now. So the atmosphere, if we relate this is where we might need to start relating this to actual physical atmosphere that occurs in our world. So this is a more complex lighting solution than the first iteration of Crayta's global lighting, because now, rather than just being able to choose between rainy or gloomy or clear, we have the ability to completely customize the atmosphere in our game. And when I'm talking about atmosphere, I'm talking about the blue sky that you see above me. So we're used to seeing our blue sky, and it's there because of all of the particles and molecules in the atmosphere, refracting light in different wavelengths at different amounts, and letting certain light through and bouncing other colors of light away. And so when we look at our atmosphere in our game, it's really kind of emulating that. So there's a lot of lighting physics that's going on here. The standard atmosphere is what it will be by default. And what that means is generally that we have a blue sky, and we can change the color of our sky, and we can change the color of how the light is scattered by the molecules in the sky with this atmospheric scattering color. So when light hits this sky, certain wavelengths, certain colors are bounced away, certain other colors are let through, and so on. So if we change this, let's change it to a hot pink, like that. You'll see that it has made the sky like almost a hot pink. It's a little bit on the darker side, darker than the color I selected. The light that's coming through, though, is that hot pink, and yet the clouds have turned green. And this is what I'm talking about when it's actually changing the model of lighting behavior. So photons hitting that atmosphere. This is, if our atmosphere was bright pink, this is how the light would come through it. Now, if I revert that and look at this next box, which says atmosphere tint, that is really just the color of the light, the color of all of it. So if I set it to white, we can see that the clouds are white and there is no tint on our atmosphere. If I set that to hot pink, now we can see that both clouds and sky and the light coming through are all pink. So that's the key difference between atmospheric scattering color, which changes the way that the light is behaving, and atmospheric tint or atmosphere tint, which just makes everything a little bit more the color that you've selected. There we go. So let's just return that to what it was, that kind of bluey hue. Was it blue? Yeah, it was blue. Cool. So that's the atmosphere and it's the two colors there. Now I purposefully skipped past this this drop down here. So by standard, our atmosphere is as thick as it is on our planet Earth. If I wanted to, I could make it thinner than that. So when I do that, it's less opaque. Our atmosphere, we can't see the stars during the day because the light from the sun is hitting our atmosphere and it's creating this blue color. If our atmosphere was thinner, we would be able to start seeing the stars. So if you want stars in your game, or if your game is set at night and you want stars, then I would recommend using the thin atmosphere. But notice how it's also affected the light. So standard will have that atmospheric scattering color will play a big role. Thin, that kind of drops off a little bit. And so, yeah, we've got stars, but it's also affecting the light, and you'll notice it's not quite as bright as it was. And if I set that to none, now we have the highest contrast between the stars and the night sky, but no sunlight coming through. And so if you set your atmosphere to none, it's going to be your job to go around with some lights and try and illuminate your world using the lights, which might be really cool. And the effect you're after, it might be a really good way to approach it if you're doing something at night. Or indoors, you might want to turn completely off any like ambient skylight or sunlight. So I'm going to keep mine as standard because I think that the time of day I'm using, it works best to have some kind of sky color. But it's up to you how you want to use your atmosphere, and don't be afraid to experiment with any of these settings to see if you can make the kind of mood you want to from your world, or discover a mood that you didn't really know you could make with this sort of thing. So that's the atmosphere and the light, sort of the lighting model in general. Let's look at the fog now. So I've already added fog to my game, and the fog is this kind of white haze. Well, this fog you can see, and it's a really good way to blend the end of your world. So if you're finding that you want to make your world feel a bit bigger or blend the end of your world with the sky, then the fog might be a good way to do that. The first one, if I just move this, you can see that this is how close to the camera your fog is. So you can have it right up close if you want to. And this will be the same for everyone. So whilst it looks like the fog starts here for me, that's because it's just my camera. On someone else's computer where they are, wherever they are in the world, the fog will start at the same distance away from them. The density is how thick the fog is, and the fall off is an interesting number. This is how high up the fog goes. So if you're looking at trying to blend your horizon, or if you if you want it to make it feel more foggy or bring out a little bit of what's quite nice is when it's when there's sort of layers of hills or layers of terrain, and you've got that fog coverage reaching up into it. So that's quite cool. That was the fog fall off. And yep, the density is just how thick it is there. The fog color is self-explanatory. I've set mine as like almost like a smoky dark gray. You could go white, or you can go some interesting colors if you wanted to make your game world a little bit different or out there, or a little bit more alien. And you can select or deselect fog affected by atmosphere, in which case the atmosphere scattering color and things and how the light comes in through the atmosphere will also impact what is happening with the light going through the fog. So if you want, you can turn that off and then it will be exactly the color that you've set it as. And if you turn it on, then it takes into account the other settings that have been applied to the light coming in from the sky. So that's the fog. And now let's look at the clouds. You can see in my game, I've added some clouds, but you don't have to have clouds. You can have no clouds if you want. It could be a bright sunny day. To add clouds, you just need to increase that cloud density. That's how thick your clouds are. So if I just move this slider up and down, you can see that they can thin out a little bit, or you can make them quite chunky, like they're almost rain clouds and ready to burst. Cloud coverage is how much of the sky is covered in clouds. So 0.6 is what this looks like. If I wanted it 100% covered, it's all the way up there. And if I want no clouds, again, I can whack that slider down to the bottom. And we can't, there's no cloud coverage. Cloud altitude is how high the clouds go, or the clouds sit. So this could be a fun one to play with if you wanted to make your game feel like a different part of the world, or the weather to feel a certain way. So if we make the clouds quite low down, this is usually what I experience in England. Low cloud cover, plenty of clouds. And so you can kind of experiment with your cloud altitude as well, to see what sort of height you want your clouds. I've brought mine down here because I'm blending in this fog in with the clouds. So I've brought my clouds right down to the bottom. And then finally, the cloud layer thickness is literally how tall the clouds are. So they're really tall now. You can see that the clouds are going up, and yeah, so that's just how thick the clouds are from top to bottom. If we made them quite thin, they can look a bit interesting. This kind of level, getting kind of fluffy and soft. Let's just return it to what it was before. There we go. Okay, so that's clouds, and you can really play around with clouds to your heart's content. It's good fun to try and use them, to make the kind of sunsets or whatever you want to do with them. And don't forget, they're affected by the atmosphere scattering color. So if you wanted to change the color of the clouds, that's your atmosphere scattering color, which will also change the color of the light and so on. So now that we're out of the kind of the atmosphere stuff, we're into some more interesting bits and pieces. We've got the horizon. I'm going to turn off my fog so that we can see the horizon. So let's start the fog. Let's actually just drop the density of the fog all the way down, and we can see, now we can see exactly where the edge of my world is. And the outer horizon is the furthest point, and the inner horizon is literally just at the edge of your world. And it's actually underneath us as well. So if I click on the inner horizon, I can select a different kind of skybox or image surround to put around my game world. Alien planet, for example, or something like jungle with lots of trees and things like that. It's actually now, this makes this part of the game look quite interesting, like it's I don't know, it's now tropical. And then so that's the inner horizon, and you can see that we have this jungle here, and then behind it is our ocean. So if I wanted to, I could make the outer horizon, maybe that's mountains, makes it feel more landlocked, or it could even be something like desert. And so you could play around with that. If, like me, your game ends with the sea, it's quite nice to use ocean as our outer horizon, not have an inner horizon, and then just use our fog density to kind of blend the game world with the outer horizon. Just return that to what it was. Okay, yeah, so that's the horizon. And I should also mention that you can add a asteroid belt if you want to do that. It's handy for space games, but it's also fun to do for, yeah, games set on this planet. Who knows where you are. Okay, so the last part of this is the post-processing. And actually, it's one of those things that I think if you're going to use either of these post-processing effects in your game, do that before you do any of the lighting stuff, because these will affect how your game looks. And you might find that you balance all of your lighting perfectly and then you turn one of these on and suddenly it's not as easy to see the elements in your game that you thought it might be. So if you're at all thinking about using one of these, make sure you turn them on when you're designing your level and when you're thinking about the aesthetics of your game. The first one, the color grading, is literally changing the color palette, like the rendering of the colors in your game world. So neutral just means that there's no kind of filter over the top of it. But you can add these kind of color filters, so that would make it a bit warmer by emphasizing the orangey reddy hues, or you can make it a bit cooler by emphasizing the bluer type hues. I will let you go away and explore that because there's plenty of cool things here. A couple other ones that are fun to use would be super color, which makes it really accentuate all of the colors to especially like pinks and stuff like that. Really good for games set in the sunset, as you can imagine. That one is interesting, but also something like monochrome if you wanted to make something feel a bit more, I don't know, arty, film noir-y. Yeah, you can kind of explore those however you want to. The post-processing effect is a selection of really interesting, fun kind of shaders that you can stick on top of your game. So let's say I wanted to make my game feel more cartoony. I could add the cell shaded filter, and if we look at the character, and you can see that it's added kind of an outline to everything, and it's got a really interesting feeling to it. It's also taking an average of colors, and rather than shading everything smoothly, it's shading everything in patches. So that's what cell shaded means. And you've also got some really out there ones as well, things like thermal. So you've got your thermal imaging and sketch, which makes it look like it's a drawing. So some pretty out there stuff, but you can see what I mean when I suggest that you set that as your filter when you start making your game, just to make sure that when you're editing your game world, things are still visible and understandable even through the post-processing effect. And that's really the core of these the sky settings. If you have any questions about the sky settings, don't hesitate to get in touch on discord.gg/Crayta. Head over to the Ask Anything channel if you're not sure where to stick your question, and people will be more than happy to help you out and get your head around some of these sky settings. The last section on these world settings is the death plane, and that's really to do with if you fall off the edge of the world, at what point do you die? Minus 1,000 units down. Where do you spawn? And is the death plane active? So that's something else you can play with, especially if you're making like an obby or something like that. So yeah, let me know how you get on. I hope this was an interesting and informative tutorial. My game world, I've gone for kind of a spooky, cold vibe, but you can really play around with all of these different sky settings. And I should also mention there's an amazing package made by Mighty Co called Smooth Sky. I think it's called something like Smooth World Settings. Yeah, Smooth World Settings. So if you want to update these things in real time during your gameplay, I would like to highlight that package as something really cool that you can incorporate into your game world. And yeah, play around with that as well. It really opens a lot of doors. Yeah, hopefully that's been useful. I look forward to playing your moody sky settingsy games in Crayta.